The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched before Jake Morrison like a metallic canyon of judgment. 47 different species had gathered here today, their representatives seated in careful arrangements that spoke of centuries of diplomatic protocol. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime, converting thoughts and words between dozens of alien languages. Above them all, the massive viewing screens displayed the vote tally that would change everything. 31 votes against humanity's admission to the Galactic Trade Consortium. 16 votes in favor. Jake felt the weight of 12 pairs of human eyes behind him as he stood at the speaker's podium. His delegation had spent 3 years preparing for this moment, learning alien customs, mastering foreign protocols, offering gifts of knowledge and friendship to species who had never set foot on Earth. Now those same beings sat in judgment, their faces showing everything from disappointment to barely concealed satisfaction. Council Prime Zethkar rose from his crystalline throne, his body catching and refracting the chamber's lights into rainbow patterns. When he spoke, his words carried the authority of 3 centuries of galactic governance. The translation came through crisp and clear. Humanity was deemed culturally incompatible with galactic society, their rapid technological advancement marking them as potentially dangerous to the established order. The Prime continued his statement, outlining how human colonies had grown too quickly, how their innovations disrupted traditional trade patterns, how their willingness to help other species without asking for payment created unfair economic pressures. Each word fell into the chamber like stones into still water, creating ripples of agreement among the assembled delegates. Behind Jake, Lisa Carter began gathering her research materials with movements that seemed almost mechanical. She had spent 15 years of her life learning to communicate with 17 different alien species. Her expertise in xenobiology had helped establish peaceful contact protocols that were now used throughout the galaxy. The Vraxians in the 3rd tier of seating had welcomed her into their family unit, teaching her their child-rearing customs and sacred songs. Now they watched her pack away holographic displays of cross-species medical research as if she were dismantling her life's work. Captain Paul Adams rolled up his presentation, materials with steady hands that showed no tremor despite the magnitude of what was happening. His fleet had rescued Moralian refugees when their homeworld faced ecological collapse, had provided safe passage for Altarian scientists fleeing political persecution, had shared navigation data that opened 3 new trade routes without asking for territorial concessions. The newest ships in his fleet incorporated safety features designed specifically to protect alien crew members during joint missions. Those ships would never fly alongside Council vessels now. Dr. Amy Peterson closed her medical scanner with a soft click that somehow echoed through the vast chamber. Her breakthrough treatments for hegemony blood disorders had saved thousands of lives. Her research into compatible food sources had prevented famine on 4 different worlds, and her work on atmospheric processors had made barren planets habitable for refugee populations. The scientific community she had spent a decade building was crumbling around her in real time. Jake Morrison had prepared 3 different speeches for this moment. One for acceptance, one for conditional approval, and one for rejection. Now he found himself discarding all 3 as inadequate for what was actually happening. The beings before him had not simply rejected humanity's application for trade partnership. They had declared human civilization fundamentally incompatible with galactic society. The silence stretched as human delegates methodically erased their presence from the council chambers. Commander Steve Harrison disconnected his tactical displays and began downloading classified navigation data that had been freely shared during the application process. Dr. Karen Walsh sealed her medical research samples and powered down the experimental healing devices she had brought as demonstration gifts. Ambassador Rebecca Clark gathered the cultural exchange materials that were meant to introduce human art and literature to alien audiences. Each movement was precise and final. No angry protests, no desperate appeals, no bargaining or negotiation attempts. The humans simply accepted the verdict and began preparing to leave, their silence growing more profound with each passing minute. Council Prime Zethkar made another attempt at diplomatic salvage, his crystalline features shifting into what passed for concern among his species. He spoke of reconsideration periods, of appeal processes, of modified partnership agreements that might address the concerns raised during the debate. His words bounced off the human delegation like light reflecting from polished metal. The assembled aliens began to shift uncomfortably in their seats as the silence extended beyond normal diplomatic protocols. Whispered conversations started in the upper tiers, translation devices working to carry concerns between species groups. Some delegates had voted against human membership not out of fear or jealousy, but because they genuinely believed more time was needed for proper integration procedures. Now they watched their decision play out in real time and wondered if they had misjudged the situation. Ambassador Morrison gathered his diplomatic credentials and placed them in a simple leather case that had belonged to his grandfather, a man who had served as a United Nations negotiator during Earth's early space exploration era. The symbolism was not lost on the aliens who understood human customs. Jake was not just representing himself or his government. He was carrying forward generations of human hopes for peaceful contact with other intelligent species. Lisa Carter took one last look at the Vraxian family section, her eyes meeting those of Kethmira, the individual who had taught her their sacred naming ceremonies and helped her understand their complex social structures. Kethmira's head tentacles drooped in what Lisa knew was a gesture of profound regret, but the xenobiologist simply nodded once and turned away. When Jake Morrison finally spoke, his voice carried clearly to every corner of the great hall without need for amplification. He did not address the Prime, did not follow diplomatic protocol, did not even face the assembled delegates. His words were simple and devastating. Humanity would remember this day, and when the Council changed their minds, they would need to do more than simply ask for humanity's return. The massive doors of the Council chamber closed behind the human delegation with a sound like thunder rolling across distant mountains. In the sudden quiet that followed, 47 different species sat in contemplation of what they had just witnessed. Some felt relief that the unpredictable humans were gone. Others wondered if they had just made the greatest mistake in galactic history. But all of them understood that something fundamental had changed in the balance of power among the stars. 3 years passed like seasons on a forgotten world. The quantum communication relays that connected the vast network of galactic civilization began failing one by one, their human-designed components burning out without replacement parts or maintenance protocols. Trade ships found themselves lost in hyperspace when navigation systems crashed, their alien crews discovering too late how much they had relied on human mapping expertise and stellar cartography updates. Dr. Amy Peterson stood in her laboratory on Luna Station, watching data streams flow across holographic displays that showed breakthrough after breakthrough in faster-than-light communication technology. Her new quantum entanglement arrays could transmit information across the galaxy in minutes rather than the hours required by Council subspace networks. The implications were staggering, but the research remained locked within human space, protected by security protocols that made alien intelligence networks look like children's toys. Commander Steve Harrison walked the construction yards orbiting Saturn, where massive shipbuilding platforms stretched across kilometers of space like metallic flowers blooming in the void. The vessels taking shape in those yards bore no resemblance to anything the Council had ever catalogued. Human engineering had evolved beyond the limitations of alien design philosophy, creating ships that were simultaneously more powerful and more efficient than anything flying under Council flags on Mars. Agricultural scientist Dr. Lisa Carter developed new terraforming techniques that could transform barren worlds into garden paradises in decades rather than centuries. Her hydroponic systems could feed millions using a fraction of the resources required by traditional alien farming methods. Colony ships carrying these innovations departed weekly for systems beyond Council space, establishing human settlements that were completely self-sufficient and increasingly advanced. The silence from human space was more profound than anyone had anticipated. Not a single transmission reached Council worlds, not a diplomatic message, not a trade inquiry, not even an angry protest about the rejection vote. Humanity had simply vanished from galactic communications as if they had never existed at all. The absence was so complete that some alien scholars began to wonder if humans had somehow found a way to leave the galaxy entirely. Ambassador Velinara of the Hegemony spent her days studying archived human cultural broadcasts, trying to understand what her civilization had lost when they cast the rejection vote 3 years earlier. She watched recordings of human music concerts where thousands of voices joined in harmony, human sporting events where competitors helped fallen rivals cross finish lines, human disaster response teams risking their lives to save alien colonists they had never met. The pattern was clear but disturbing. Humans consistently chose cooperation over competition, shared resources instead of hoarding them, and offered help without expecting payment. The first serious crisis struck when the Moralian plague spread across 17 different star systems simultaneously. The disease attacked neural pathways in ways that confused Council medical science, killing billions while their best physicians struggled to understand its basic structure. Deep in archived research databases, the cure existed in files compiled by Dr. Karen Walsh and her medical team 2 years earlier during their study of cross-species neurological compatibility. The treatment protocols were detailed, tested, and proven effective, but they remained locked behind the impenetrable barriers that now surrounded human space. Council emergency sessions convened on 12 different worlds as the plague continued. It spread. Desperate diplomatic missions launched toward the Sol system, carrying messages that ranged from formal requests for assistance to barely concealed begging. Every transmission met the same response: absolute silence. Human monitoring stations detected the incoming messages, recorded them, filed them away, and sent nothing in return. Captain Paul Adams received intelligence reports about the plagues progress through networks that Council security services could not detect or intercept. His medical ships could have reached the affected systems within days, carrying enough cure supplies to halt the pandemic before it claimed another billion lives. Instead, he followed the directive that had been established the day humanity walked away from the Council chambers. No contact, no assistance, no acknowledgement of alien appeals. The plague burned through Council space for 8 months before finally running out of susceptible populations to infect. The death toll reached numbers that would have horrified human sensibilities just years earlier. But Earth's leadership had made a collective decision to prioritize their own species' development over alien welfare. They had offered friendship and been rejected, offered partnership and been deemed incompatible, offered knowledge and been feared for their generosity. Trade networks that had operated smoothly for centuries began experiencing systematic failures as human-maintained systems went offline. Shipping companies discovered that their most efficient routes had been calculated using human stellar surveys. Their fastest loading procedures had been designed by human efficiency experts, and their most reliable equipment had been manufactured using human quality control standards. Replacement systems existed, but they were slower, more expensive, and significantly less reliable. Dr. Ryan Foster made breakthrough discoveries in ancient artifact analysis that would have revolutionized Council understanding of their own history. Ruins on 18 different worlds contained technologies that predated known civilization by millions of years, but their operation principles remained mysterious to alien scientists. Foster's team had cracked the fundamental codes that governed these ancient machines, unlocking secrets that could have advanced every species in the galaxy by thousands of years. The knowledge remained in human databases, growing more sophisticated each day, but completely inaccessible to the beings who had originally discovered the artifacts. Scientific conferences that had once featured human researchers presenting cutting-edge discoveries now struggled to maintain attendance as alien academics realized how much innovation had been driven by human participation. Medical journals stopped publishing breakthrough treatments, engineering magazines ran out of revolutionary designs, and agricultural publications found themselves recycling decades-old techniques as new discoveries dried up the Council's intelligence. Services worked frantically to penetrate human communication networks, but found themselves facing encryption technologies that seemed to anticipate every code-breaking technique they attempted. Human settlements beyond council space reported normal activities through channels that alien monitors could detect, but the technical specifications of their advances remained completely hidden 3 years after humanity's silent departure. Galactic civilization faced a truth that chilled the leadership of every major species. They had not just rejected humanity's membership application, they had rejected the very foundation of their own continued progress and prosperity. 5 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, and the universe had changed in ways that no alien leader could have predicted. Deep space monitoring stations along the galaxy's outer rim detected something that made seasoned military commanders pause in disbelief. The Devourer fleet was moving again after sleeping for 10,000 years. The ancient machines emerged from the void between galaxies like nightmares given form, their massive hulls darker than space itself and bristling with weapons that predated most known civilizations. Scouting reports described vessels the size of moons, their surfaces covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The Devourers had awakened with a hunger that could only be satisfied by consuming entire star systems, turning planets into raw materials for their endless expansion. Admiral Tony Brooks sat in his command center on New Geneva Station, watching long-range sensors track the approaching fleet through data feeds that Council forces could not access. His tactical displays showed information gathered by human deep space probes that had been monitoring the galaxy's edges for 3 years, watching for threats that might endanger Earth's expanding colonial empire. The Devourer formations moved with mechanical precision, their advanced scouts already probing the defenses of outer Council worlds. The first desperate transmission from Council space in 5 years came through encrypted channels that bypassed official diplomatic networks. Admiral Kethver of the Altarian Republic had served alongside Brooks during the Rim Wars 15 years earlier, back when humans and aliens had fought side by side against pirate fleets and rogue artificial intelligences. The two officers had saved each other's lives on multiple occasions, had shared stories of home across the vast emptiness between stars, had built a friendship that transcended species barriers. Kethver's message was raw with desperation and barely contained terror. The Devourer Vanguard had entered Altarian space 3 days ago, consuming the outer mining colonies without slowing down. Defensive fleets equipped with the most advanced weapons Council science could produce had engaged the ancient machines and been swept aside like insects facing a hurricane. 3 billion Altarians faced extinction within hours, and their military forces were completely outmatched by technology that seemed to operate on principles beyond their understanding. The transmission crackled with interference as Kethver's voice broke through the static, speaking directly to his old friend across the years of silence that had divided their peoples. He acknowledged that the Council had no right to ask for help, that humanity owed them nothing after the rejection vote, that pride in politics had created a gulf too wide for normal diplomacy to bridge. But children were dying, entire families were being vaporized by weapons that turned matter into energy, and billions of innocent beings faced annihilation for decisions made by leaders they had never elected. Director Helen Rodriguez convened Humanity's Emergency Council on New Geneva Station within an hour of receiving Kethver's message. The debate was intense but brief, with representatives from Earth's major governments, colonial administrations, and military commands participating through secure quantum links. Some argued that humanity had no obligation to rescue the very beings who had rejected them. Others insisted that innocent lives should never be sacrificed for political reasons. And a few suggested that this crisis might provide an opportunity to demonstrate human superiority. The decision was unanimous and decisive. They would not rejoin the Council, would not beg for recognition, would not compromise their independence for the sake of alien approval. But they would not watch genocide unfold when they possessed the power to prevent it, regardless of past grievances or wounded pride. Humanity had evolved beyond the need for galactic recognition, but they had not evolved beyond compassion for innocent life. Captain. Don Murphy received his deployment orders while his ship was docked at the Titan shipyards, taking on supplies for a routine patrol mission to the outer colonies. Within 30 minutes, his vessel was racing toward Altarian space at maximum hyperspace velocity, leading a task force of 47 other ships that represented the cutting edge of human military technology. The fleet moved through dimensions that Council science had barely begun to understand, covering distances and hours that would have taken alien vessels days to traverse. The battle began before the Devourer vanguard detected the approaching human ships. Long-range weapon systems engaged ancient machines from beyond their sensor range, using targeting data processed by artificial intelligences that operated at speeds no biological mind could match. Human tactical doctrine had been developed through 5 years of studying archived Devourer encounters, analyzing every recorded battle, understanding weaknesses that Council forces had never recognized. The engagement lasted exactly 6 minutes and 17 seconds. Devourer constructs that had shrugged off Council plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes found themselves torn apart by human weapons that exploited fundamental flaws in their defensive systems. Ancient armor that had protected the machines for millennia crumbled under focused gravity pulses that disrupted molecular bonds at the quantum level. Weapons that had consumed planets were silenced by electromagnetic interference patterns that overloaded their targeting computers. When the last Devourer vessel was reduced to expanding clouds of free-floating atoms, the human fleet vanished back into hyperspace without acknowledging any of the frantic communication attempts from Altarian Command. No victory speeches, no demands for gratitude, no requests for recognition or reward. The ships simply disappeared as if they had never existed, leaving behind only a comprehensive tactical analysis of Devourer, technology and defensive weaknesses. The data package that appeared in Altarian military networks contained information that would have taken Council scientists decades to compile, complete technical specifications of Devourer vessels, detailed analysis of their weapon systems, tactical recommendations for future encounters, and manufacturing instructions for defensive countermeasures. The intelligence was precise, comprehensive, and freely given without conditions or expectations. Admiral Kethver stared at his tactical displays in stunned silence as casualty reports confirmed what seemed impossible: 0 Altarian losses, complete destruction of the Devourer vanguard, and a treasure trove of strategic information that could protect his people for generations. His old friend had answered his desperate plea with overwhelming force and clinical efficiency, then disappeared without waiting for thanks or recognition across Council space. Intelligence services worked frantically to analyze scanner records of the human intervention, but found their instruments had barely detected the attacking fleet until the battle was already over. The ships that had destroyed an ancient threat in minutes remained as mysterious as their builders, operating with capabilities that suggested human technology had advanced far beyond anything Council civilization had imagined possible. Word of humanity's intervention spread through Council space faster than their fastest communication networks could carry it. Within days, every major species had emergency sessions debating what they now called the human question. But the discussions carried a weight that had been absent 5 years earlier. The beings who had been dismissed as culturally incompatible and potentially dangerous had just demonstrated military capabilities that exceeded anything in the known galaxy. And they had used that power to save lives rather than seek revenge. Senator Kate Miller watched the emergency council broadcasts from her home in the mountains of Colorado, observing alien leaders struggle with concepts that human children understood instinctively. She had been present for the original rejection vote, had seen the fear and jealousy in alien eyes as they cast humanity aside because their rapid advancement threatened established power structures. Now those same beings faced a truth they could no longer deny. They needed humans far more than humans had ever needed them. The Devourer attacks intensified with mechanical precision, striking deeper into Council territory with each wave. Ancient machines that had slept in the void for millennia awakened in response to some signal that Council scientists could not detect or understand. Each assault followed the same pattern. Massive fleets would emerge from hyperspace around populated systems, ignore all attempts at communication, and begin the systematic consumption of everything in their path. Captain Paul Adams monitored Council military communications from his flagship in the Outer Sol system, listening to desperate battle reports from commanders whose forces were being systematically destroyed by opponents they could not effectively fight. Devourer technology operated on principles that Council science had never encountered, using weapons that converted matter directly into energy and defensive systems that seemed to violate known laws of physics. The pattern of human intervention became predictable in its consistency and maddening in its silence. Distress calls would echo across Council communication networks as Devourer fleets approached populated systems. Local defense forces would engage and be overwhelmed within hours, and then human ships would appear from nowhere with the devastating efficiency that had marked their first intervention at Altair. Each battle lasted between 5 and 8 minutes, regardless of the size of the Devourer force or the complexity of the engagement. Human tactical doctrines seemed to operate on principles that made ancient war machines as vulnerable as paper targets, exploiting weaknesses that Council forces had never recognized despite fighting these enemies for months. When the last Devourer construct was destroyed, the human fleet would vanish back into hyperspace before anyone could establish contact. Dr. Ryan Foster could have explained the fundamental principles that govern Devourer technology, could have provided the theoretical framework that would allow Council forces to develop effective countermeasures, could have shared the historical analysis that revealed why these machines had awakened after 10,000 years of dormancy. Instead, he continued his research in laboratories that existed beyond the reach of any Council intelligence service, behind barriers that had become as impermeable as the event horizon of a black hole. The tactical data packages that appeared in Council military networks after each human intervention contained information that would have taken alien scientists decades to compile through conventional research. Complete technical specifications of destroyed Devourer vessels, detailed analysis of their weapon systems and defensive capabilities, recommended countermeasures for specific classes of ancient constructs, and manufacturing instructions for equipment that could exploit newly discovered vulnerabilities. Ambassador Velenara found herself appointed to lead a new Council committee tasked with establishing communication with humanity, but her efforts met the same impenetrable silence that had characterized the past 5 years. Every transmission sent toward human space was acknowledged by automated systems, logged in databases, and filed away without response. The humans were clearly listening, clearly capable of receiving messages, but they chose to remain as unreachable as distant stars. The frustration among Council leadership reached levels that threatened the stability of the galactic government itself. Species that had voted to reject humanity now found their worlds protected by human military forces that operated with capabilities beyond their understanding. Beings who had feared human technological advancement now depended on that same technology for their continued survival, but could not access the knowledge that might allow them to defend themselves independently. Commander Steve Harrison led the largest human intervention force yet assembled when the Devourer main fleet struck at the Kepler system, home to the Council's primary government installations and most important military academies. 3,000 ancient machines emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their combined firepower capable of sterilizing entire star systems within hours. Council forces representing 12 different species engaged them with everything their civilizations could muster and lasted exactly 43 minutes before their defensive lines collapsed completely. The human response fleet numbered only 200 ships, but they moved through space with the coordinated precision of a single organism controlled by a vast intelligence. Their weapons fired in patterns that created cascading failures throughout the Devourer formation, each successful hit making subsequent targets more vulnerable to destruction. Ancient machines that had survived for millions of years found themselves outmaneuvered by opponents who seemed to predict their actions before they made them. Council Prime Zethkar watched the battle from his command bunker deep beneath Kepler Prime's surface. his crystalline features reflecting the light from tactical displays that showed human forces systematically dismantling an enemy that had seemed unstoppable just hours earlier. The being who had led the vote to reject humanity 5 years ago now witnessed their salvation at the hands of the very species he had deemed incompatible with galactic civilization, when the last devourer construct was reduced to its component atoms. The human fleet formed up in perfect formation above Kepler Prime and broadcast a single transmission on all Council frequencies. The message lasted exactly 10 seconds and contained only 4 words: "Your space is clear." Then they vanished back into hyperspace, leaving behind a detailed analysis of Devourer command and control systems that revealed vulnerabilities in the enemy's central coordination networks. The silence that followed was more profound than any that had come before it, because every being in Council space finally understood the true scope of their miscalculation. 5 years earlier, humanity had become their protectors without asking for gratitude, their saviors without demanding recognition, and their guardians without seeking reward or acknowledgement. The end came with a swiftness that caught even human intelligence networks by surprise. Deep space sensors detected the Devourer, main fleet emerging from the galactic void in numbers that dwarfed every previous encounter combined. Thousands of ancient machines arranged themselves in formations that stretched across light years of space, their combined mass rivaling that of small star systems. This was not another probing attack or strategic strike. This was the full awakening of a mechanical civilization that had been gathering strength in the darkness between galaxies for 10 millennia. Council Prime Zethkar stood in the emergency command center buried beneath Kepler Prime's capital city, watching tactical displays that showed the approaching fleet with crystalline clarity. His advisors spoke in hushed tones about evacuation protocols and survival bunkers, but everyone in the room understood that no conventional defense could stop what was coming. The Devourer force moving toward the heart of Council space carried enough firepower to reduce entire star systems to their component atoms, and their advance could not be delayed or diverted by any known means. The attack began at 0347 Galactic Standard Time with the simultaneous emergence of Devourer vanguards around 17 different Council worlds. Each target had been selected with mechanical precision to maximize the collapse of galactic government and military command structures. Communication networks went silent within minutes as relay stations were consumed. Military academies were vaporized along with their irreplaceable archives, and government installations were reduced to expanding clouds of debris. Ambassador Rebecca Clark monitored the destruction from her office on Luna Station, watching the systematic dismantlement of a civilization that had rejected humanity 7 years earlier. Long-range sensors showed Devourer formations moving through Council space like a plague of mechanical locusts, consuming everything in their path without regard for surrender attempts or evacuation efforts. Billions of beings died in the first wave of attacks, their final transmissions carrying pleas for help to a universe that had no means to answer them. The Council's military response was brave but futile, with defense fleets from 30 different species converging on Kepler Prime in a desperate attempt to protect the seat of galactic government. Ships that represented the pinnacle of alien engineering threw themselves against Devourer formations with the courage of beings fighting for their civilization's survival. The battle lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of every Council vessel, their crews dying without managing to destroy a single ancient machine. Council Prime Zethkar transmitted his final message as Devourer constructs breached Kepler Prime's planetary defenses and began consuming the world's surface installations. His words carried across the emergency networks to every surviving Council world, formally dissolving the galactic government and releasing all member species from their treaty obligations. In the same transmission, he authorized any surviving leader to negotiate independently with humanity for protection. Abandoning 7 centuries of diplomatic protocol in the face of extinction, the destruction of Kepler Prime took exactly 6 hours, with ancient machines systematically processing the planet's infrastructure, archives, and population centers into raw materials for their own expansion. When they finished, nothing remained of the galactic capital except a field of metallic debris, orbiting a star that had witnessed the rise and fall of interstellar civilization. The symbolic heart of Council space had been consumed as efficiently as any other target, leaving behind only silence and scattered ruins. Ambassador Velinara found herself commanding a refugee fleet of 12 ships, carrying the last survivors of the Hegemony Leadership Council, fleeing toward the Outer Rim systems, in hope of finding sanctuary among the independent colonies. Her species had voted to reject humanity's membership application 7 years earlier, motivated by concerns about cultural compatibility and economic disruption. Now she faced the responsibility of crafting an apology that could somehow bridge the gulf created by pride and fear. The message she carved into the surface of a dead moon took 3 days to complete, using construction mechs salvaged from destroyed ships to spell out words visible from orbital distance. The text was simple and devastating in its honesty. They had been wrong to reject humanity, wrong to fear their rapid advancement, wrong to choose political stability over moral courage. The apology requested nothing except forgiveness, acknowledging that humanity owed them nothing and had already given far more than any rejected applicant should be expected to provide. President Nathan Hayes convened Earth's Leadership Council for what everyone understood would be the final decision on humanity's relationship with the remnants of galactic civilization. The debate was longer and more complex than previous discussions, with representatives from colonial governments, military commands, scientific institutions, and civilian populations all weighing in on the fundamental question of whether humanity should fully rejoin galactic society or maintain their protective isolation. The consensus that emerged reflected 7 years of growth and self-discovery that had transformed human civilization in ways their former council colleagues could barely comprehend. Humanity had evolved beyond the need for galactic recognition or validation, had built an interstellar society that operated on principles of cooperation and shared knowledge, had developed technologies that made them functionally independent of any other species. But they had not evolved beyond compassion for innocent life or the basic moral obligation to help those who could not help themselves. The human response fleet that emerged from hyperspace above the ruins of Kepler Prime dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen, with construction ships and medical vessels outnumbering military escorts by ratios that spoke of humanitarian rather than conquest intentions. Admiral Tony Brooks led the formation personally, bringing with him not weapons of retribution but tools of reconstruction, not armies of occupation but teams of engineers and doctors and teachers ready to help rebuild what the Devourers had destroyed. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood once again before assembled alien representatives, but this time the meeting took place aboard a human medical ship providing emergency care to Devourer attack survivors. The man who had walked away from the council chambers 7 years earlier without speaking now broke humanity's long silence with words that carried both forgiveness and wisdom earned through years of isolation and growth. His message was broadcast across every surviving council world simultaneously, carried by human communication networks that operated faster and more reliably than anything alien technology had achieved. Humanity had heard their apologies and their pleas for help, had never stopped listening to their troubles or monitoring their welfare, but would not repeat the mistakes that had led to this crisis, the new galactic society that began taking shape. Among the ruins operated on principles that humanity had developed during their years of exile: cooperation instead of competition, knowledge sharing instead of information hoarding, mutual aid instead of political maneuvering. Humans took no leadership positions and claimed no special status, simply began rebuilding civilization according to values that made such catastrophes impossible in the future.